prioritize fully staffing our health departments. We need a governor who will put forth resources in combating the opioid epidemic that is destroying our communities. Are we ready for change?
Yes!
Asking Council 3, I need to hear, are we ready for change?
Yes!
Our board made the decision to endorse this man who is opposite from Larry Hogan. Our board met with and interviewed each candidate, a former union member with CWA, a former AFL-CIO staffer and civil rights leader, a man who handedly won a contested 8-way primary. A man who has pledged to make Maryland a better state for working families and union members. Brothers and sisters, let me introduce you to our next governor.
Well, it's good to see you. It is good to be back with my AFSCME family. And when I say AFSCME family, I mean literally AFSCME is my family. My grandma's a 101-year-old retired Maryland social worker. She helped train a younger social worker named Barbara Mikulski. And my granddad, God rest his soul, died in '92. He was probation officer in Baltimore City for 30 years. My grandparents started their journey in Maryland in 1941 in the McCullough Homes housing projects in West Baltimore. And I'm a Rhodes Scholar. And I don't understand, I can't explain rather how you get from one to the other without unions in Maryland. That's right. What got my family out of poverty in West Baltimore. And deeper into West Baltimore, relative affluence in Ashburn was AFSCME. The day that my granddad became a probation officer was the day that we became a double union household. And as governor, I will be committed to making Maryland a model for how we build a stronger union movement south of the Mason-Dixon. Yes. Let me also, I had fun in the debate with Larry Hogan. I think we saw why he was unwilling to even talk about debates in October. Man doesn't have a plan for anything. I mean, you would think that if schools had fallen from 1st to 6th on your watch, in this state that for 5 years before you were governor was first in the nation in education, you would have a plan on that if nothing else. And when I gave him 5 minutes of talk time, which in debate is a long time, think about how long a 60-second commercial feels like. This is like 5 of those. And he could not explain his plan for education. It turns out the man doesn't have a plan for anything. I mean, I've said that as governor, yes, I will make sure that Walmart pays their fair share of taxes because my small business does and they don't. And I've said that hedge fund managers will pay their fair share of taxes too because their secretaries do and they don't. I've also said that we will give Marylanders the biggest tax cut any governor has proposed in modern memory, which is to cut our sales tax. To that, it's the most regressive tax we have. It's totally unfair to working people. And here's the thing, Larry Hogan says he has one issue. It's cutting taxes. He doesn't even have a plan for that. The man literally has no plan. What he does have is a track record. Let's talk about that track record for a second. I mean, before we get to our workers, let's just talk about our communities. We talked about how schools have fallen from 1st to 6th. Healthcare costs have surged. You can't explain the foreclosure crisis in communities in Maryland without dealing with the healthcare crisis. Healthcare costs are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in Maryland. Healthcare premiums have surged 120%. The Maryland Health Exchange on his watch. Murders are up 34% outside of Baltimore City, statewide. And when you factor in Baltimore City, 52%. Opioid deaths are up 160%. I got friends in this room, I think we all do, and people in our families who are struggling with it right now. And the aftermath of it. Parents in this room who are orphaned by their children. Larry Hogan said that would be job one. He would declare a state of emergency on his first day. He waited 730 days. He did it the first day of his third year. And thousands of our neighbors died. That is not leadership. No. And then he says he's a businessman. No, I'm a businessman too. He's a land developer. It's a very specific kind of businessman. Let's be clear. He says he made Maryland open for business. And he would not lose one Fortune 500 company. And we only had 4. And now we're going to have 3. Because for 4 months, the Discovery Channel called and said, we need help from the governor, we need help from the governor, we need help from the governor, and he did not return their phone call for 4 months. And our job growth is so low that if we had the job growth of Virginia, we would have 40,000 more jobs right now, and here's the punchline, their job growth is below the national average. Wow. Ours is just way below. And he likes to tell you that he cut tolls. You know what else he's cut? The amount of money you should have in your pocket.
That's right.
And I'm talking about, yes, AFSCME workers who are 6 steps behind, 8 steps behind. Tightened belts because of the Great Recession. Never imagined that there would be an extension to that called Larry Hogan. But I'm also just talking about regular workers in our communities in the private sector. If we had the income growth of Virginia right now, the average worker would have $8,000 more in their pocket over the last 4 years. If we had the income growth of Delaware, we'd have $15,000. We can do much better. This is Maryland. Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. You can look at the polls and you might ask, well, how could the other guy lose? But if you look at the underlying numbers of voters, the better question is, how can he win in this year if we do our job and turn out? And I don't know, but I think after the foolishness with Kavanaugh, I know some women who are saying, I better show up to vote this year. And then you look and you say, well, what does this governor have anything to do with it? I'll tell you. The next governor of Maryland will appoint 5 judges to our highest court, the Maryland Court of Appeals. Do you want Kavanaugh's party picking them? No. You know, we've got lots of good reason. You know, as I said to folks, look, Donald Trump needs to have a message sent to him. And what better way to send a message to Donald Trump than to elect a civil rights leader to be the governor of the state of New York? A former AFL-CIO staffer from a Maryland union family who understands how we rebuild the middle class is the same way that we built the middle class, which is to build a stronger labor movement in Maryland. Let's talk about the state of our state workers. Let's talk about who our state workers are. Our state workers are heroes. My grandma was my hero. She was Barbara Mikulski's hero. Barbara Mikulski came up to me at the Emerge Maryland event. My running mate, Susie Turnbull, she's not just part of this wave of women running for office across the country. She helped build that wave. She founded Emerge Maryland that trains women to run for office across Maryland. Any women who want to run for office, you can go sign up with Emerge. Barbara Mikulski walks up to me at the Emerge Maryland event waving her finger. Because, you know, my field of vision starts right about here. And she says, you're Mamie Todd's grandson, aren't you? I said, yes, ma'am. She starts to tear up. I said, Senator, my grandmother's wonderful. She's also very much alive. She's 101. She's very much alive. I said, would you like to talk to her? She said, I could. I said, she's 101. She's always home. So I gave her a call. And they got on the phone and they Senator was clearly animated from the call. But when she handed the phone back to me, she was wiping a tear out of her eye. And she said, well, you see how just saying her name affects me. I said, I noticed that. What's that about? She said, well, she took me under her wing when I was a young social worker. And she taught me. I said, well, what did she teach you? She said, most importantly, she taught me how not to feel awkward. I just beamed inside. You could list 100 adjectives to describe Barbara Mikulski. Awkward would never be on the list. Apparently, Grandma did a good job. My granddad taught me anything, it's that being a public servant in Maryland is being a hero. Remember, I said to my granddad once, probation officer, chief of juvenile probation for West Baltimore, late 1970s, early 1980s. There are still probation officers in Baltimore, like in their 70s, 80s, guys who love the job, who he trained. Said to him, I said, aren't you ever afraid? City's kind of spiraling out of control, hardcore drugs is taking root, folks are getting killed more and more every summer. He said, of course I am. That's why I give all those young men my home address. And I say, I get home every day at 6 p.m. You just had the worst day of your life, which means that they may have killed somebody. You come sit on my step. You don't know what to do, you come sit on my step. When I get home, we'll go inside and we'll figure out the next step together. He understood that courage today saves lives tomorrow. And that's what each of you does. You show courage day in, day out, and it puts lives back together. That's right. It saves lives in our communities. But he also understood that there is no them. There is only us. We are all Marylanders. We rise together or we sink together.
That's right, brother.
And we sink faster, we let folks like Donald Trump and his silent accomplice, Larry Hogan, tear us apart. And we rise faster when we decide, we will come together across every line they say is supposed to divide us. We'll come together across lines of rural and suburban and urban. We'll come together across lines of black and white and brown and Asian and Native American. We'll come together across lines of faith. With the faith that in a democracy, there is strength in numbers. That's right. And when we pull together, not only can we not be beaten, but we can go from sliding backwards to leaping forward. Right. Correction officers in this room, raise your hands. Thank you for your service to our heroes. You are heroes. You are heroes. And I want to assure you that I have listened to you. I understand the grave risk that Larry Hogan has put you in. That there are too many of you who find yourselves too few in number inside the prison. Too few in number on the yard. We all want to ultimately see fewer people recidivate and our prison system get smaller. There's no reason why, if America's 5% of the world's people, that you have 25% of the world's inmates. But there's only one way to get there. And that's to do the things we know. Ultimately make all of our communities safer, because they send people back better ready to be a constructive part of our communities. In the meantime, what we will never do when I'm governor is balance the budget on your backs. And you will see me inside of the prisons walking with you. Come on. Former head of the NAACP, and that's relevant to your job in 3 ways, and I want to walk through. One is, I had an AFSCME unit. Go ask Glenn Middleton. He represented workers at NAACP HQ. I was named president just before the start of recession. I started in September 2008. And I had to present my budget for the next year in October 2008 when the recession was announced. And our workers have pensions and they have good benefits because they're AFSCME members. And like I said, I knew that my good grace was made possible by AFSCME pensions. And I looked those workers in the eye and I said to them on the first day that the recession was announced and everybody was worried, that we will get through this. We will be stronger in the end. The benefits you have today, you will have whenever this recession ends. We will never balance a budget by, say, shifting from defined outcomes to defined inputs. All right, we're not going to go from defined benefits to defined contributions. And you will get, I said to him, you will get cost of living increases and as merited raises all through this recession.
That's right.
And I said to him, we won't lay anybody off. And they were looking at me and saying, he's 35 years old. How can he do all that? Well, when I retired and leading the NAACP, like leading the state is dog years. I was 41, I was no longer 35, but I felt much older in that moment. They had all their benefits, they had all gotten cost of living adjustments every year. Many of them had gotten raises. And if you go ask Glenn Middleton, he will tell you I was the fairest NAACP president they can remember in negotiating with them. Literally, there was a moment where the general counsel of the NAACP came back to me and said, well, they've asked for this, we're giving them this, we're not giving them that. And I looked at the list of, we're not giving them that. I said, a lot of those things are reasonable. Why aren't we giving it to them? She said, because we never give it to them.
Oh, yeah, that's
I said, these are working people with families. They're our colleagues. And you're telling me that, pardon my language, we're going to screw them just on general principle? I said, no. I said, take that list back. And you figure out the things we absolutely can't afford, because they're already getting most of what they want. But anything that we were not going to give them simply on general principle that we can afford to give them, we will give them right now.
That's right. I know that's right.
And we have people at the negotiating table tearing up because they knew what we knew, all my predecessors knew, which is they had a right to those things. And we could afford them. And it was just about power. And that was wrong. Because a civil rights organization, like a state when it's well led, should be 100% about empowering working people.
Yes, that's right.
So number one, I have led an organization with an AFSCME unit. I was fair to them, and I made sure that all through the recession, they did better, not worse.
Right.
Second thing you should know about me. The way I got criminal justice reform done, the way I helped get it done, as president of the NAACP, I played my role, was always in conjunction with corrections officers. You can literally go roll the tape. You can Google Ben Jealous NAACP criminal justice policy. You'll find a press conference at the National Press Club. And standing next to me, all around me, you'll see every civil rights leader you expect to see. You'll also notice Grover Norquist is standing there. And Newt Gingrich's spokesperson. I'll get to that in a second. And just over my shoulder is Mike Jimenez, who at the time was the president of the CCPOA, the largest corrections officers union in the country. And why was he there? He was there because we had our eyes targeted on reducing the prison population in California, where they were triple bunked. His officers have been working at least 20 hours, often 40 hours, mandatory overtime for 6 years. Their families were falling apart. Yes. And they understood that we could cut the prison system in half in California, they'd all still have their jobs. And while they would make less overtime, their divorce rate would go down too. And their families would stay together, and their sons and their daughters would have more engaged parents. And that was urgent to Mike. You know why? Because Mike had spent his life supervising other people's sons. And saying if they had a good dad, if they had a loving dad like me, they would never be here. And then one day he looked out on that yard and he saw his son. Not somebody who looked like him, not somebody who reminded, somebody who was his son. And he realized there, but for the grace of God, go all of us. And he wanted no part of allowing his workforce to be abused so that their families would fall apart at higher rates than were natural or necessary in any other way, except for the fact that the state kept forcing them to work overtime. And so I will work with the corrections officers to create a plan First, to right-size the staffing, to make sure that we end the shortages in critical areas, to make sure that folks are made whole, and that we make up for the recession known as the actual recession and the other one known as Larry Hogan. And ultimately, to create a vision for how we create a safer Maryland. There are places in Europe where they're doing cutting-edge things to make their communities safer inside of their prisons. And when you ask them, as Michael Moore did, where'd you get these crazy ideas? They said America 50 years ago. There is wisdom amongst the old COs about how to use time more constructively. We'll bring out that wisdom, and we'll bring new wisdom to the table, and we'll create a vision together. Officers and advocates, all of us, leaders and the government together, for how we use that time. Because, you know, when somebody goes in illiterate and they come out illiterate, they're probably coming back to you. And we know we can do better. And my promise to you will also be this. We will make sure that it gets easier and easier for your families to empower your children to pursue their dreams. And it gets easier for you, if you have a dream beyond being a CO, to pursue that dream too. Yes, I'm going to make sure there's more education opportunities inside the facility, but there will also be more education opportunities outside the facility. We will make our community colleges tuition-free for everyone. How? Because I don't know if you noticed, but the richest 1% got 27% of Donald Trump's tax cuts. So I think they can afford to pay 1% more, and if they do, we will make our community colleges free for everybody in the state. And let me also be clear. We will make sure that our communities get safer for all of us. Republicans only got two playbooks. Democrat run-in, they call him a tax and spend liberal. And the other one is the Willie Horton, Donald Trump playbook. Oh, they're scary. They're going to let out dangerous people. What the heck are you talking about? The last thing I would do is let out people who are dangerous before they've served all their time. I've had 2 family members shot in Maryland in the last 10 years. One in Columbia, one in Prince George's County. One was a teenager who was killed on the spot at a gas station. And the other one was a senior citizen who had agreed to testify against drug dealers. Wow. When that happens to you, 2 emotions course through your body. The first is you never want this to happen to your family again. And the second is you don't want this to happen to anybody else's family either. But like my grandfather, I understand that courage today saves lives tomorrow. And that's why I'm so committed to sitting down and working with you to figure out how we create a system that over time gets more of the killers and more of the rapists and more of the burglars off the street and sends more of the addicts to rehab.
Thank you.
Sisters and brothers, Donald Trump, Larry Hogan, Republican Governors Association, GOP, they represent a whole bunch of wealthy special interests that profit when they can tear us apart and turn us against each other. Yeah. I was born on a bridge. My parents' marriage was against the law in Maryland. I was shipped back to West Baltimore every summer, but I was raised in California in the school years. A bridge between East and West, a bridge between black and white, a bridge between Baltimore, where my grandfather and my uncles, courageous professionals, and older cousins. A bridge between rural America, where my dad's brother ran a lumber yard. And what my life has taught me is that we have more in common than we have uncommon. My life has taught me, when I listen to my uncles, black and white, rural and urban, is that the things that our families are struggling with in one place, pretty similar to what our families are struggling with somewhere else. Yeah. Let's recognize those ads and that hate campaign that they're in the midst of it for what it is.
Right.
Wealthy special interests trying to turn working people against each other. And let's understand that we have a more powerful way to lead people in our society. Yes, organized money has a lot of power, but organized people has way more power. Yeah. And in this region, raise your hand, just curious, as far as you know, your people kind of always been somewhere around the Chesapeake Bay. Virginia, Maryland, DMV, Delaware. Yeah, look at us. Many of us are probably cousins, and not all the ones who... I found out that I descend from Thomas Jefferson's grandma by her other grandchildren that were her slaves. That's why my people's so light. We won't get into that. I'm as Irish as I am African. Think about that one for a second. But think about this. My grandma, if she was here, she's a 101-year-old retired Maryland social worker. Who turns, by the way, 102 in November, so let's give her a good birthday. She's every actuary's nightmare. And she is proof in the value of a good pension. And that's why we're going to fight and make sure that we hold on to your pensions. When my grandmother was here, she would say, baby, never forget. In this region, around the Chesapeake Bay, before there were slave rebellions, there were colonial rebellions. Irish indentured servants and African slaves rising up together. The first one on record in this region, 1663, 300 years before Martin Luther King's March on Washington, in Gloucester, Virginia. Response to what? An edict that came down from the King of England to the Governor of Virginia to the people on that dock that could be summarized as simply, and your status, the lowest status of either parent, and your status shall convey to your children. Your status shall convey to your children. In other words, from the very beginning of the American experiment, from the very beginning of these colonies that became a country, as working people, we were willing to endure a lot. As Irish indentured servants, we were willing to endure a lot. As African slaves, we were willing to endure a lot. So long as we might hope that our children's opportunities will be better than ours.
That's right.
But the moment that it became clear that our children were being condemned to a fate no better than our own and possibly worse, we would rise up, and we would rise up together. We would rise up, and those differences that were so obvious became so much less important than the fact that our children's dreams were being threatened. And I would say to you, sisters and brothers of AFSCME, the union that allowed my family to go from raising a baby in the McCullough Homes housing project to sending one off to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, that union, I would say to you right now, this is one of those and your status shall convey to your children kind of moments. We are in a fight we can win. We have a month left, 31, 32 days to get it done. And what it's going to take is us deciding to believe that we can beat the governor. And we all know we can. All we got to do is do what we do. We got to get on the phone with our sisters and brothers in other states and say, we need you walking, knocking some doors in Maryland over the next few weeks. We need to go back to our meetings with our members and say we need you all to volunteer and to encourage your family to volunteer too. We need to talk to the clergy that we know are pro-union clergy that's minister to our families and say we need you to push the congregation into the coordinating campaign. And we need to pull out our checkbooks and our credit cards and whatever you can send. This campaign, we don't take money from corporations. We don't take money from corporate PACs. We don't take money from big businesses. Our average donation last quarter to Friends Evangelists was $42. And why is that important? Because I just stood here in front of you and promised you that when I'm governor, we will work together to make Maryland a model for how we build a stronger union movement south of the Mason-Dixon.
Yeah.
And if I was on the take from the corporations, I would break that promise in a second. But brothers and sisters, I have put everything I have into this because I believe in you.
We believe in you, Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
And I believe in this moment, we have an opportunity to unite the people of Maryland, to stop sliding back and start leaping forward. I will not ask you to do anything I'm not asking myself to do. Just give me your all for the next 31 days, and you will be looking at the next governor of Virginia, and then we'll get back to winning again. For all of our families. Thank you, and God bless.